Hi all, I have another fascinating Emanuel Lasker game to show you today. Lasker plays a little bit like Tal, especially in the Benoni type structures. It's a very fascinating game what I'm about to show you. I'd like to thank Osiev Onos for this game selection. So he has been making several excellent game suggestions on the King's Crusher Discord. So if you want to check out King's Crusher TV/Discord, the game suggestions forum, and come and make your own game suggestions there as well, maybe. So this was in the 1914 St. Petersburg tournament. This is a very, very interesting format. There was an initial all-play-all, and the qualifiers went on to play another all-play-all. So I'll read you the description, actually. So the St. Petersburg tournament of 1914 featured the joint winners of the 1914 All-Russian Championship and players who had won at least one major tournament. So there were the veterans Blackburn and Günzburg, established masters such as Tarrasch, Bernstein, Janowski, Nimzowitsch, Alekhine, Marshall, as well as the world champion Lasker, and his two most prominent rivals, Rubinstein and Capablanca. The tournament was divided into two sections. The first stage from the 21st of April to the 6th of May. That was an all-play-all event, with the first five finishers proceeding into the second stage, which ran from the 10th to the 22nd of May. This second stage was a double round all-play-all, with the scores from the preliminaries being carried over to the final. So this is one of those games. So Marshall against Lasker, so this is in the initial stage, I believe. So D4 from Frank Marshall. We have knight f6, c4, d6. So this is going into an old Indian defence. So black not fianchettoing the bishop, but going for a quick e5. So knight f3, e5. White is not giving in on the dark squares yet. Playing a move like d5 weakens c5 a little bit. So this seems quite a solid move. It does hem in this bishop though, for the moment. Bishop e7, bishop d3. We have black castling, queen c2, rook e8. White castles, bishop f8, and Tarrasch has actually made some comments on this game which are fascinating to also mention. So here is a Tarrasch comment, and if you check out the historical video by Lucas Anderson about the life of Tarrasch, the life of Lasker, it mentions that Tarrasch was a bit cagey. He didn't really want to play Lasker that much and avoided some of the tournaments. So this was also a fascinating tournament where they did collide, and there were notes by Tarrasch on this game. So he writes of bishop f8, with his somewhat unorthodox opening, black is rather cramped. Yes, that does seem to be the case. Knight g5. Marshall creates, this is Tarrasch commenting, he starts a violent attack which would seem to be perfectly justified. Okay, but in the midst of it, it's as if Lasker had exercised a spell on him. He falters, and all of a sudden it's the world champion who has a good advantage. So let's see what on earth happened here. So knight g5, threatening h7, quite a lot. And we have g6. Now h6, you might ask, actually runs into bishop h7 check. So there's no knight takes, because that would be queen takes h7 mate. Just put that on the board. And also, it will be a disaster like this as well. If king h8, there's knight takes f7 checkmate. So it's important to play g6. And in fact, that's a really good attacking move, because it also liberates the f pawn in one go, so f4. And it's actually quite dangerous for black. So Lasker's in a bit of a scary situation here. He's playing one of the most dangerous attacking players of the era, and there's a lot of pressure on his king side. He tries to counter on the dark squares. His first move is e takes d4, trying to loosen white's d4 a bit, and now fianchettoing here, bishop g7. Marshall carries on quite violently with f5, and this does liberate, of course, this bishop. So this does seem very logical and justified in many respects. Tarrasch thinks he's throwing caution to the wind, and maybe he could have just completed his development with a more simple, modest move like bishop d2 and rook e1, and he calls that without the slightest risk. So he believes this is throwing some caution to the wind. We have now the move knight g4, And actually, there is something rather embarrassing technically about White's back row here. And this is kind of annoying, actually, this back row issue. White actually retreated this knight. You might wonder why not go full blast with f takes g6 here. The snag is bishop takes d4 check and knight, not f takes, sorry, on f takes. There is knight f2 coming up. So, for example, bishop takes looks extremely violent, as if black can resign maybe. But now, knight f2 check secures a draw, actually, because these guys are not helping the back row in this particular position. If rook takes, then rook e1 is mating. And otherwise, there's a pesky perpetual check. So, yeah, it's not all entirely straightforward, it seems. And instead of bishop takes g6, you might ask, if h3, then knight e3. And here you can see that this is still quite violent, in fact. And White should actually emerge with a big advantage. So even in this line, actually, h3 is plausible here. So, yeah, fascinating stuff. But we see this knight f3 being played. So maybe that's already a slight concession, a bit passive in this position, just to move the knight back rather than going for it. So yeah, Marshall had this. I mean, if you look at Marshall's pieces, I mean, you don't really want this against Marshall. I mean, all of these pieces are essentially liberated. The positional play's been sorted out, just to get a very, very strong attack. It's been sorted out. Yeah. I don't know if that's worth checking out again with, instead of f takes g6 there's also king h1. And if bishop takes d4, f takes h3. Again, we transpose into a situation which here, this is also technically very good for White. For example, this rook sack is not convincing. If queen takes, there's queen h2, and that's better for White. And if knight e5, just knight takes and rook f3, this is better for White. So yeah, it's a retreat which maybe wasn't needed, this retreat here. And in fact, after c5, f takes, it's still very, very dangerous for black. And this is a capture away from the center. On h takes g6, I mean, it looks a little bit odd because you don't usually want to capture away from the center. If h takes g6, though, bishop g5 is very, very nice for White. For example, this position, there's even some carnage going on, like this, where a knight can come to f5, and it's a very, very dangerous situation. For example, like this, can end up winning the queen. So it's fascinating, this f takes g as well. It seems highly provocative. And now White play a truly horrific move. And certainly Tarrasch, who maybe doesn't like the rise of Emanuel Lasker, is totally horrified in his notes by this next move. White play for minus 1,000 points. What would you play in this position? Or what wouldn't you play in this position, rather? 1,000 points for what is a good move, and 1,000 points for what isn't. 10 seconds starting from now. Okay. It's a position on full blast. Look at these pieces. They're so active. But here, Frank Marshall, this is not one of his best moves. Probably one of his worst moves against the world champion ever. h3. It's very, very feeble. The knight doesn't have to move back. The knight doesn't have to go to e3. Before we get into that, if Tarrasch is horrified. He says very feebly played and almost inexplicable, except for Lasker's queer, that's not a word we use too much nowadays, knack of willing his opponents to make weak moves. Against any other opponent, Marshall almost certainly would have played bishop g5. gaining the advantage in every variation. It almost looks like witchcraft. And probably witchcraft was big in the time of this game. It was still a thing. So, but let's have a look at bishop g5. Yeah, 1,000 points if you play bishop g5. If knight d f6, d takes is actually rather strong here. It turns out, after rook a1, black's pieces are pretty sleepy here. And if this is one of the best pieces for black, if that can be exchanged off, it seems he's right. You know, in a lot of the variations after knight e4, for example, here, this is extremely unpleasant for black. This scenario, there's too much pressure on the position. For example, like this, a bit of playing around, but now, you know, knight takes and then bishop takes. It's a slaughter potentially for the king side here. Here, there's a big threat now of bishop f6 or bishop h6 sometimes. And here, for example, queen d7, bishop h6. You know, things are going to drop off. There's too much pressure on the black position after bishop g5. So he is right. And if queen b6, that just makes things worse. Knight d5, bang, big tempo. That's hopeless. It's just even worse, for example, like that. So yeah, this move lets Lasker back in the game with a vengeance. So Lasker plays, guess what Lasker plays in this position? 10 seconds to pause the video. What would you play? Yeah, he just takes on d4. He counters a threat of his knight with a threat on the opponent's knight, and taking out a key centre pawn. And with it, there's a kind of killer common square, or at least equalising. At least the e3 square is a common square of these guys now. So a wonderful move. To which Tarash says, "Of course." We have bishop g5, which is too late now, hitting the queen, because there's another clever idea of c takes d4. Before we get into bishop g5, if h takes, then this is very, very nice for black. This kind of situation, black's got a big advantage positionally. There's no worries at all. And in fact, look at white's pawns. They're a total wreck. Black's pieces are fantastic. There's hardly any king safety issues. The two bishops are now gone. Black's king is much secure as a result. So big advantage to black there. So yeah, so we have bishop g5. But now, guess what Lasker plays? Lasker's really back in the game now with this next move. An accurate move here. And he's back in the game all of a sudden. Black to play. If I give you 10 seconds to pause the video. He counters an attack on his queen, funny enough, with an attack on the opponent's queen. And you can do that here with knight e3. Really annoying stuff, isn't it? Very, very annoying. We have queen f2. Yeah, it doesn't bother taking that, because taking that actually hits the rook, and it's going to be fine for black. So we have queen f2. But now, that is a monster knight on e3, and it's kind of prophylaxis against knight d5 now. So queen b6 is so much more improved in this version of events. Hugely improved, because d5 is covered. That huge tempo gainer otherwise is covered. White plays it anyway. It looks very, very unpleasant to do anything else. You know, opening up. This just looks horrendous. So knight d5, knight takes, c takes. Now knight c5. And Tarash writes, now black is well developed and a pawn up, but he still has to face some danger with his king's wing. Okay, so yeah, okay, rook a d1. Here, if knight takes d4, black just plays bishop takes, pinning the queen essentially, so the queen can't indulge herself. So after queen takes, then taking here, knowing that this queen's protected by a7 and that wins material. So after knight takes, yeah, not knight takes d3, because then there's check and queen takes and mating. So yeah, rook a d1 though was played, not knight takes d4. We have just bishop d7, which sets up some nice tactics now on actually, you might think this is a strange departure of previous tactics. Sorry, this diagonal, this diagonal. Let me put this arrow on the board. Is coming alight now after knight takes d3 possibilities. We have queen h4. The thing is, here, actually, visually, it is rather visually scary still for the black king side. And you'll note this queen here, it's away from the king. And white still has significant pressure and still has the bishop pair. So not everything has yet evaporated. And this is really, really interesting. So these old masters, Tarrasch, one of the strongest players of the time, he put a variation here which maybe one should be a little bit cynical. Yeah, he noted that here, that if black played knight takes d3, he noted, rook takes bishop b5, white has rook b3, which is annoying, yeah? Which does seem to be, he says, he calls it being refuted by rook b3. But arguably this is the start of a new story here. White is without the bishop pair, and it does look a little bit misplaced. And in fact, black hasn't even got a tempo gaining check here, which kind of really dislocates this rook. If we continued Tarrasch's annotation here with d3 check, to just treat it as the start of the story, not the end of the story, and queen c5 to unpin, and d5 looks very vulnerable. This is a big advantage to black, technically, even if, no major material is won there. Taking out this centre pawn, this is just fantastic for black. But anyway, and it turns out, knight takes d3 immediately. It might actually, this is really funny stuff, might actually be inviting this pin. It might be the best way to go. Because in the game we have a different way of trying to get this tactical skewer. The positional implication to get rid of white's bishop pair as well, to soak up any attacking pressure, as well as a key ingredient here. So Lasker played bishop a4. And here, actually, Frank Marshall misses a phenomenal opportunity to equalise the position. But it does require a full piece sacrifice. But not the way he played it, funny enough. And I'm not entirely sure it's that easy to explain here. Frank Marshall did play a piece sacrifice here. Guess what he played. Maybe it's not too hard to guess. Okay, he played bishop takes g6, which Tarrasch says is white's best chance in the circumstance. Not true. There's something really weird going on here. If white had played b3, benefit of modern engines, apparently this position, believe it or not, is equal. Because after knight takes d3, not rook takes, allowing bishop e5. But guess what white can do instead, which apparently is perfectly equal with a good follow-up. White to play here would be equal with this next move. Can you guess if I give you 10 seconds to pause the video? I mean, it's tragic news losing the light square bishop, right? As an attacking player, you don't want to lose the bishop pair. But bishop h6, apparently there's still some bite here to white's attack with bishop h6. So much so, it's equal. The engines are marking this position as equal. So, for example, queen c7, bishop takes. The point is knight g5. Don't waste time, taking on d3. Try and get some common squares, some potential killer common squares going. So rook f7. So say here, rook f7, white's got a big advantage. And, what does actually black do in these circumstances after bishop h6? So if knight e5, can you see what white plays here? So even though black is a piece up, white doesn't want to waste time taking the bishop. White has got a strong attack here. What can white play here if I give you 10 seconds. Bishop g7, yeah, I'll highlight the killer common squares, h7. And if h5, then taking here, and it's very, very dangerous after knight f7 check. Queen f6, more common killer common squares being emerging. Queen h8 being threatened. And if check, king h7, queen g5, yeah, apparently this is fine. There's too much attacking potential. If black has to give up a piece, that's apparently one of the better moves. White's winning here. So it's a very, very dangerous situation, actually. Black would have to tread very carefully after bishop h6. So isn't that strange? The way of sacking the bishop here, not to chip away, which seems totally rational to chip away at the pawn chain to make it a pawn chain of 1, but just leave the bishop to be taken on its square, just to get the time, the extra tempo for this attack, letting black have the 2-pawn chain around his king, is apparently the way to go. But this way is very, very different. Bishop takes g6. So Lasker takes here. And it does seem a very, very unfortunate situation positionally now. And Frank Marshall maybe had something, you know, quite nice calculated here. If he moves the rook, it just seems black's better if he moves the rook. You know, black's even though 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Black's got a huge central control, pressure on b2 here. Anyway, Frank Marshall found a very tactical way to play this. Guess what he played? A very surprising move, actually. What would you play with white? Okay, he really went for it with bishop d8, attacking the queen with tempo and vacating g5 for knight g5. So he's still got a similar idea to some of the ideas we've seen with bishop h6. However, Lasker is happy to take this. Sorry, can I just smack a note? There is a slight snag with this position, actually. Black is a piece up, sorry. Black is actually a piece up. Yeah, it can't really carry on in this position with rook e1. What am I talking about? I have to excuse that. Losing track of the situation here. So he has to go in for it. He does actually have to go in for it because he's a piece down now. So yeah, bishop d8. The thing is, okay, so white's already a piece down, bear that in mind. So Lasker takes now another piece, so it's 2 pieces. Knight g5, big threat of queen h7. So it's actually logical now. Black is 2 pieces up right now. Yes, it's important to keep track of these things. So what does Lasker play in this position? So 2 pieces up, nice central control, equal on pawns. Big threat of checkmate. What would you do here? Okay, don't panic. Just carefully check the upsides of white's move, which is to threaten mate. What are the downsides? Well, they already exist. You're already 2 pieces up. Make it 3 pieces. Queen takes g5. Extinguish the mate threats. 3 pieces for the queen. And not only that, there's another downside, winning the exchange as well. So a feast of material for that queen. Queen takes g6 was played. On rook takes d1, king h7, you know, black's fine here. Black's got a lot of material. Black's going to be absolutely great there. So we have queen takes g6. And now Lasker plays another actually really, really accurate move here, believe it or not. Can you guess? There's 2 or 3 moves which are really accurate and definitely guarantee an advantage for black. Can you guess one of them? If I give you 10 seconds to pause the video here, black to play here. So there's a potentially, a big threat of rook f7. Okay, bishop c2. Yeah, this is one of the better ways to handle this threat. One of the better ways, because it's with tempo and another tempo. With d3 if the queen takes. Also, bishop h5 is another good way to drag the queen away. And then this is very nice for black, as you might expect, keeping that pass pawn in the center. Rook f8 is also another way, because black can keep that pawn for a bit, especially with the tactical knight f2. But there is actually a way to slip up here with rook e7. You might think rook e7. Maybe this is a testament to Laska's accuracy, even when he's got a load of pieces for the queen. But this move apparently, after rook takes d1, apparently this is after knight e4, rook takes. If black loses that pawn, this is going to be very, very hard to win indeed. Engines give it as equal, believe it or not. So, for example, like this, there's trouble for black. For example, like this, you can see that if we get this situation, there's lots of opportunities for perpetual checks. Black really needs to keep, basically, in a nutshell, that passed pawn in the center. So this was a really cool as a cucumber move, bishop c2. Great move with tempo. And the point is also, so white took that. If he plays check, then the bishop can come back to shield the king with a big advantage. So white takes that, but this has got the big upside now. This pass pawn is maintained, and it's a menace, Dennis the Menace. a5 secures that knight outpost. We have rook f8, and it's a much, much better version of events with this very, very dangerous pass pawn still on the board. So much, much better version of events. And here, yeah, it's getting very unpleasant. So rook f1, Tarrasch writes, nor can he save the game by sacrificing the exchange, since rook e1 followed by, I'll put that on the board, rook e1 followed by bishop e5 would lead to mate. If knight takes, then the bishop e5 is leading to checkmate like this, for example. So yeah, it's pretty bad. So okay, so we have rook e2, rook f1. So not rook takes d3. So it's a feast of pieces for the queen. After d2, yeah, this pawn is instrumental to win this very easily. Rook takes, king takes, queen takes. It doesn't matter about the knight dropping off because that pawn's winning. King g8, queen d8 check, king h7, queen h4 check, bishop h6, and the game ended here. It is totally hopeless. There's no more real checks. There's no checks. If the game had continued, for example, queen f6, which is queen this pawn, and yeah, it's tons of material there. So yeah, a pretty dramatic game. Laska was on the verge of being completely wiped out, and it seems, Marshall's in his favourite element type of position, but plays the move h3, which unfortunately, after c takes and knight e3, it's what's really, really unfortunate about that sequence. I think Marshall's confidence, I've said this to some of my chess students recently, maybe his confidence was at 70, 80, 90% there, and wasn't factoring in, when your confidence is too high, maybe you don't factor in the opponent's resourcefulness. So c takes d4 was a really resourceful move, countering an attack on the knight with an attack on the knight. And then furthermore, after that, there was the knight e3 countering an attack on the queen with an attack on the queen. It's rather cruel. And the problem with that knight on e3, that makes queen b6 playable, because then there's knight takes d5. It changes the whole picture of events. But even then, after all that, when Lasker's playing to win an exchange on the diagonal, White still technically had enough resource available to secure a draw, even with a remarkable piece sacrifice. Not the way he played it. So it does seem a rather tragic series of events for Frank Marshall indeed, this game. Maybe I'm not sure it's witchcraft, but I think it's more of a question, maybe win probability. But I think Lasker, as the psychologist, maybe he is aware that if opponents get overly confident, then they naturally don't factor in the nitty-gritty tiny little resources that might be available to opponents. So you become overconfident because you think, well, I've got this position by my play so far, so it logically follows if I carry on at this speed or whatever of play, I'm going to win. But it's not the case. Lasker played really clinically when he had the opportunity and came back in this game in a strong way. So yeah, I think there's an element of overconfidence creeping in, perhaps. That's a theory. Let me know what you think. It was a great attacking position to waste anyway. So in the end of this tournament, Lasker did qualify for the next All Play All. And he won that crushingly. That second All Play All. He caught up, the leader, Capablanca. And, he edged past him. So he ended up with 13.5 out of 18, Lasker. Capablanca 13, so he edged by half a point over Capablanca. So very tight there. 13 out of 18 from Capablanca. Alexandra Alekhine 10 out of 18. Tarrasch 8.5 out of 18. So finally they're in a tournament together because Tarrasch had been avoiding him like the plague in previous events. And this was evidence, yes, he could do better than Tarrasch in the tournament. Then Frank Marshall 8 out of 18. And then you'll notice the other players at ChessGames.com, they've only played 10 games because they didn't qualify for this second All Play All. So yeah, those key players, amazing. What an amazing 2 All Play All tournaments for Emanuel Lasker. Okay, comments, questions, likes, shares, appreciated. And if you want to invite me for a game, kingscrusher.tv or bit.ly/chessworld. And if you've got game suggestions, come to the Kings Crusher TV /Discord chat. Okay, thanks very much.